Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming out to our joint town hall. I truly must say that in my 5 years, 3 months, and 10 days, this is the most amount of people that I have ever seen assemble for a town hall. And let me be very clear, this is very important because as homeowners and residents of DeKalb County, it is important that you understand what lies ahead of us. This evening, we will discuss two different topics, and we will actually begin with House Bill 581. And I'll go ahead and do a little preamble, and then I will introduce the speakers tonight. We'll spend approximately 30 minutes making our presentation, and then thereafter we will answer questions. Hopefully by the time we're done, you will understand where we are. Of course, I am Lorraine Cochran-Johnson, and I'm very proud to serve currently as your Chief Executive Officer here in DeKalb County. This evening, we will begin with insight from our leaders. And the first panelist that we have this evening, let's go to our panelists, please. Okay, we can go past me. I've already made my introduction. And next we have Mr. TJ Siegler. And of course, TJ Siegler is a member of DeKalb County's own, and he is the director of the Office of Management and Budget. He has served since 2018, and he's worked with DeKalb for a total of 14 years in a variety of roles, from the CEO's office to the Office of OMB. He's worked for the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia for 3 years, and he holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Alabama, a master's in public administration degree from the University of Georgia, and he is a proud DeKalb County resident living in Dunwoody with his wife Elizabeth and their children, 2 children. Next we have with us this evening our Deputy Attorney for DeKalb County, and that is Mr. Terry Phillips. And Terry has been with us for well over 20 years here in DeKalb, and he provides advice as legal counsel for county officials, boards, departments, as well as the Office of the Chief Executive, our commissioners, as well as financial officers, treasurer, Board of Registration and Elections, public safety, public works, as well as human resources, finance, purchasing, contracting, and public information officer. Highlights of his practice include supervising the elections team for DeKalb County, as well as working with us during the coronavirus and pandemic, SPLOST and eHost. He works with blight remediation litigation, media relations, as well as compliance for open records in DeKalb. He also manages intergovernmental relations and contracting for our federal, state, and local agencies. Next, we have Mr. Dan Baskerville. For DeKalb County, Mr. Baskerville serves as our attorney, our counsel of record for Denton's law firm. And he specializes in state and local government, and he has over 20 years of experience representing individuals at the General Assembly. So he's the man that reports down to the Gold Dome each day during legislative session to ensure that our interests and our legislative priorities are met here in DeKalb County. He concentrates on assisting clients of the governmental affairs team with various state and local issues, and he also works in a variety of different specialty areas: transportation, environmental, education, economic development, as well as finance, healthcare, and local government. At the local level, Mr. Baskerville works to assist various clients with zoning and land use issues and obtaining economic development incentives, as well as permits and licenses. We also have with us this evening, rounding out the team, COO, Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Zachary Williams. And of course, he reports to both the CEO as well as the Board of Commissioners in DeKalb County, as outlined within the Organization Act that governs us all. He has a distinguished career in public service and he has held leadership roles in counties and municipalities across the Southeast. Prior to joining DeKalb, he served as the county manager for Fulton County, where he led capital improvement programs and implemented a nationally recognized health equity initiative. And his past roles also includes assistant county administrator for Broward County, Florida, and assistant city manager of Coral Gables, Florida. He is a credentialed manager by the International City and County Management Association, and he holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and public administration from California State University in Long Beach. And at this time, I will go straight into our presentation. So, those of you who have assembled here today, you would ask, what is House Bill 581? It came into effect January 1st of 2025, although it was actually signed by our governor last April. And it amends the Georgia Revenue and Taxation Code. HB 581, it is a complex state law with multiple sections that covers a variety of changes. And what it creates for the state of Georgia is a floating homestead exemption. Now, for those of you who live here in DeKalb County, we already have a homestead exemption that we apply to each and every one of your tax bills to help mitigate your tax liability to DeKalb County. So this evening, we want to help you understand what it means. Now, I also want to give a point of clarity because we must follow the law. Now, tomorrow, our Board of Commissioners will vote whether or not we opt in or opt out. I want to be very clear that the law required that in the public notice that we gave, in order to hold the 3 consecutive town halls, we must indicate that the town hall is to opt out. That was a legal requirement. However, that does not indicate that the Board of Commissioners will vote to opt out. We are simply following state law and utilizing the language that was required from the General Assembly. So, in terms of discussion, what does House Bill 581 do? I've already explained. It creates a statewide homestead exemption. It allows the county to opt out, and it creates a new local option sales tax that is referred to as FLOSS, for floating local option sales tax. Now, at this time, I am going to bring up Attorney Terry Phillips, and he will take it from here to better help you understand the consequences and the parameters that are currently associated with HB 581.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. There are big decisions to be made. As our CEO explained, our board will decide tomorrow if DeKalb County elects to opt out of HB 581. If they do not do so this week, then the county will be in HB 581 and will preserve the option of ultimately having the floating homestead exemption. So that we're clear, I'd like to define a few terms. I think these terms are important to understand so you can follow them as they're used in our discussion throughout this evening. And you'll hear these terms as our board discusses it and in a lot of what you'll see in the media about HB 581. A homestead exemption is a reduction in the amount of property tax qualified homeowners owe. It reduces what you have to pay. A base year homestead exemption freezes, it holds your property value in a given year. As your property value goes up over time, you do not pay tax on that new value. So just as a hypothetical to understand that definition, if your property value was frozen in 2010, in 2025, very likely your property is worth much, much more, and you wouldn't be taxed on the difference between the 2025 value and the 2010 value where it was frozen in a base year homestead exemption. And you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, DeKalb County currently has a base year homestead exemption, and I'll touch on that a little more in a second. A local option sales tax is where a percentage is put on top of the tangible personal property you buy, and a referendum has to approve that. Examples in DeKalb where you'll see this is our current SPLOST. In the SPLOST, there is a 1 cent tax added every time you spend $1. That 1 penny is used for the purposes allowed under SPLOST. And you, the voters of DeKalb, approved that. House Bill 581 creates a statewide base year homestead exemption, and we will automatically be in it unless we opt out. To be clear, the tax commissioner would have to use DeKalb County's exemption if it were more beneficial to taxpayers. That's a very important point. But I want to walk through what House Bill 581 does. It creates this statewide exemption where property values will be frozen. The earliest year would be 2024. So if you think about the value of homes last year as assessed, and you compare that to where your home may have been frozen by DeKalb's exemption, it would have been likely several years before that. The statewide exemption will not leave your value just to be taxed at 2024. There will be what's referred to as an inflation increase, and that'll be handled by the Georgia Department of Revenue. They will add over time, as they deem appropriate, an inflation increase. In DeKalb's version of a base year tax, there is no inflation added. You simply have the tax applied to that value that was frozen when you acquired it. DeKalb started in 2007. So the earliest value you would have under DeKalb's would likely be 2006. If you obtained your homestead after that, it may be a later year. The law says in HB581 that the tax commissioner must apply the most beneficial one to your property tax. So if DeKalb opts in, DeKalb would have both the existing base year exemption that DeKalb provides and the state floating exemption that the state provides. DeKalb's tax commissioner, Mr. Irving Johnson, and his staff would look to see which one is more beneficial to you, the property owner, meaning which one gives you the biggest tax break, and then apply that one. For most property owners, that very likely would be the DeKalb version, because you'd probably have a year frozen that's some time ago, and you'd get the savings that come from not having those increased values taxed. So, as I said, it's automatic unless we opt out. As our CEO explained, the opt-out in our advertising was required, and I'll touch on that in a second. The tax commissioner must apply the one that's most beneficial. That is not discretionary. The opt-out procedure written in the law required that the county would advertise in the newspaper, on the website, and in a press release 7 days prior to each of these public hearings, and we would expressly say in those advertisements on the web and in the press release that the purpose for these gatherings is because of DeKalb's intent to opt out. That statutory requirement drove the use of that language. It does not mean DeKalb will in fact opt out. It was required by the statute. We have to conduct these 3 hearings, one of which had to be held in the evening. This is the evening hearing. The first hearing was held previously, obviously. This is the second, and our last hearing will be tomorrow. Following each of these hearings with proper notice and the like, if the commission elected to opt out of House Bill 581, the county has to send a resolution it passes to the Secretary of State documenting its choice to opt out, as well as proof of the advertising and the fact that these public hearings were held, and all of that documentation going to the Secretary of State by March 1st would complete the opt-out process described in House Bill 581. Here's the schedule that you see the county following. Obviously, today is the 24th. This is our evening hearing. As I said, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock will be a public hearing for House Bill 581 as a part of our regularly scheduled commission meeting. Later in the agenda, there is an item that's been published for opting out of House Bill 581, but it's important to note that our commission elected to also have on the agenda an item for opting in. That is not required by law. They elected to place that item on the agenda in case the commission elects to opt in. They would like to document their reasoning for opting in, have it memorialized in a resolution so that in years to come, their decision and the reasons for it are documented in their records. There's also a local option sales tax created by House Bill 581. It has been nicknamed FLOST. It is nicknamed FLOST because the exemption that I've described is floating, so they borrowed from that to distinguish this local option sales tax from many others that exist in the law. It can be 0.5% or 1%. It is solely for the purpose of providing property tax relief. We would have to levy the new option under 581, and the cities in the county would have to also choose to levy this and opt into the bill, because every one of the county's governments, in terms of cities and the county government itself, would have to have a base year exemption in place in order to take advantage of this local option sales tax. And the simple way to think about this and how they work together, the exemption reduces your property tax, and then the sales tax is really a credit. Money's raised by the sales tax, and that money is used to offset your property tax to help the county fund all of the operations of the county other than just taxing its property owners. The big decision will be made tomorrow on whether or not our Board of Commissioners elects to opt in or opt out. That meeting will be broadcast as usual on DCTV and live streamed if you cared to follow it.
Thank you so much. At this time, we will have a second half to the HB 581 presentation that will be given by TJ Sigler. I also want to say that for DeKalb County, as it relates to the HB 581, we are the only county out of 159 in the state of Georgia that is adversely affected by our 1 cent MARTA penny. And we will discuss that. We will have Dan Baskerville, because we have created language within the bill, because the maker of the bill did not realize that it would have an adverse effect on DeKalb. So being as how that was not their intent, I do believe that we should be able to clear that, because there are consequences that are associated with assessing more than 2 cents. And at this time, Mr. Sigler, go right ahead.
All right. Thank you, Madam CEO. And so as Madam CEO and Mr. Phillips have explained, HB 581 is a long and complex bill. For my portion of this, though, I'm going to focus in strictly on the floating homestead exemption and comparing that to our current property assessment freeze that we have here in DeKalb County. So just to reiterate some of the points they made, because we currently have a property tax or a property assessment freeze, which is a form of a base year exemption, if we were to opt into HB 581 for the floating homestead exemption, it'd be up to the tax commissioner. They would have to apply whichever exemption is more beneficial to the taxpayer. So that means that if you're better off under one of them than you would be on the other, that's the one that would apply. They both would not apply at the same time. So with our base year exemption, which is commonly called the assessment freeze, the way it works is whatever year you apply for that exemption and it's granted, that becomes your base year. The prior year's value becomes the base year. So if you apply, well, if you buy a new home, for example, and you apply for a homestead exemption, the assessment freeze will be automatically applied to your property, and the purchase price of your home would become the base year value. And then in subsequent years, if the value of your home, the assessment of your home goes up, whatever the amount that goes up is what is exempted from the property taxes. Right, and this is just a chart or a table comparing the existing property assessment freeze there on the right with the floating homestead exemption. So some of the main differences are the effective dates. So the earliest that the floating homestead exemption would go into effect would be in 2025, so this year, and the base value would be based on the values as of 2024. So for the existing exemption, the first year it was effective was in 2007, so your base year could be as far back as 2006. It will all just depend on when you purchased your home and when the assessment freeze was first applied. Then in terms of the expiration, so for the statewide floating homestead exemption, there is no expiration. For our local exemption, it would expire December 31st, 2033. That is unless there's action to renew it. So that was created through a local act of our DeKalb delegation, and then there was a referendum to approve it in the first place. So that could still occur. It's just that in the most recent renewal of it, it did set a sunset on that. That could be as late as December 31st, 2033. And then finally, I already kind of touched on this, but the base value with the floating homestead exemption, as Mr. Phillips explained, that can increase annually based on inflation, and that's a determination by the state revenue commissioner about what inflation value to use. So it could be something like the CPI or some other sort of index. And then for the local DeKalb County's property assessment freeze, the base year is fixed, so it cannot increase. So once you have that exemption, as long as you own that home and that's your primary residence and you have the homestead exemption, that base value won't go up. All right, so I just wanted to point out a few things. This is a property tax bill from last year, and I just want to show you how you can kind of see what exemptions you're receiving currently. So this is just one of the boxes from the top right corner of the bill, and if you can see it, I don't think I have a pointer here, but that red box there where it has the exemption code. So that first H1, that is your basic homestead exemption, and that could be a different designation depending on which homestead exemption you have. It could be H2, it could be H3. But if it's an H something, then that's a homestead exemption, your basic homestead exemption. And then the F designation means that you also have the property assessment freeze applied to it. And I would encourage anyone, especially if you've lived or you've owned your home and lived in your home since 2006 or before 2006, to check your property tax bills to make sure that the F is there. Because as I said, if you buy a home now and you get a homestead exemption, it's automatically applied. But if you owned your home prior to the existence of the freeze, you would have had to apply for it. So you can go to the tax commissioner's website and check your property tax bill to see if it's there. And then right below that, you have the base assessment freeze. So that is the base year value for this property. And then right below that is the net frozen exemption. And so what that is that appeal assessment number from the left minus the base assessment freeze or the base year. And so the value of the exemption for this property is $38,660, I believe. I'm looking at an angle, but I think that's correct. Okay, and then this is just where it shows the tabulation and the calculation of your property taxes. So again, outlined in red there, that's the frozen exemption. So for this property, the frozen exemption saved them $804 off their property tax bills in 2024. And one thing I'll point out here too is you'll notice that the top portion of the bill is for the county. Then you have school operations, and then you have some other charges on there. And the frozen exemption only applies to the county taxes. So school board is also affected by HB581, but I believe they have already opted out of the floating homestead exemption. So they don't have any sort of base assessment freeze like the county does. So that's something that we get questions about a lot when summer comes and people start getting the property tax bills. Why did my taxes go up if I have this freeze? And it's generally, well, if you have the freeze, it's almost always going to be due to the school taxes. And I'll just add one more thing there is that cities too may or may not have a base assessment freeze, and they're also affected by HB 581. So depending on whether you live in a city and whether they had an assessment freeze or whether they decided to opt in or opt out of HB 581, that could also affect your total tax bill. Okay, so what's the bottom line? So we believe that whatever impact opting into the bill or opting out of the bill is going to be budget neutral or revenue neutral to the county. And the reason being is that in virtually every case, we feel like the existing homestead exemption is going to be the more beneficial exemption for taxpayers. So if anything, we think you're saving more money now under the current exemption, so we're not going to lose money if we were to opt into the floating homestead exemption. There may be some costs based on the implementation of the floating homestead exemption, basically keeping track of the separate values and the second exemption. And then what does that mean for taxpayers? Well, I think I just answered that question. So for most people, we believe that the current exemption is going to be more beneficial than the floating homestead exemption. And remember, whatever decision is made by the Board of Commissioners, you will continue to receive whichever exemption is more beneficial to you. And so you will continue to receive that savings as long as that current exemption is in place. And also, we haven't talked much about this, but the e-host property tax relief. E-host is another sales tax, so a 1 penny tax that is used for property tax relief. That'll continue through 2029 as well. Okay, and the final slide here just has 2 links. The first link is to the tax commissioner's website. Oh, excuse me, that's to the budget office website. So you can find information about HB 581 there, as well as about the budget, which we'll go over later during tonight's meeting. And then the second link there is to the tax commissioner's website, where it has information about the exemptions. And that's also where you can go and look up your tax bill and see which exemptions are applied to your property. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siegler. And at this time, I'll call forth Dan Baskerville with Denton's, who represents us under the Gold Dome, and he will add yet another layer to what you've heard this evening in terms of where we are under the Gold Dome with the legislation and trying to remediate any negative condition that it may have for the residents of DeKalb. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Madam CEO, and good evening. And I'll try to add another layer, but try not to add any confusion to anything you've heard tonight, because this is, as you've heard, a very complex issue. So I'm going to touch on 2 parts of the law, which is it's broken down into sales tax, which has been explained tonight. You know, when you buy something, a sales tax gets put on for MARTA, for the e-host, for the SPLOST. And then there's an ad valorem part of the law, which deals with property taxes, which is really what you're here tonight to hear about, which is whether the county would opt out or stay in under the floating homestead exemption. So first I'll touch on the sales tax part really quickly, and that is something that Madam CEO mentioned quickly, was about the MARTA sales tax. Now, let me make it clear that everything with 581 has nothing to do with the MARTA sales tax staying in DeKalb County. The MARTA sales tax is untouched by 581. The MARTA sales tax will continue in DeKalb County. The question is when the law was passed to create the e-host and splost for the county, which we did originally back in 2015. I actually worked on that law and then tweaked a little bit in 2017 and 2019. The only way to get what is called the 2% cap, be able to come under that 2% cap, which means you can't have more than 2% local sales tax, is exempt the MARTA sales tax from that. So, and Fulton and Atlanta have some exceptions for that, so they could do their water sewer projects. And DeKalb was exempted from that 1% MARTA sales tax, so it could do the e-host and the splost. And what the author and the drafters of the legislation of 581 thought they were doing was making sure that the MARTA tax was still exempt. But the MARTA tax law is in itself very complex, and there's stuff that governs Fulton, City of Atlanta, and DeKalb has a section that's different from those. So when exempting the sections, and they thought they exempted anybody who had MARTA, they left out DeKalb. So that's the legislation she's talking about. We're hoping to have a hearing on some language to clean that up and trying to get a bill passed to rectify that unintended consequences. Actually, what I'm holding in my hand is something from the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, and their first priority this year was clean up 581 because there were several unintended consequences. So it's not just our sales tax issue in this one bill, it's a couple other cleanup issues that they're trying to do. Now turning to the ad valorem section about opt-in or staying, or opting out or staying in. So the General Assembly has seen a number of jurisdictions decide to opt out. Mostly, they really are all like school boards or cities or other places. I think there's 73 local government jurisdictions, because we're talking about counties, cities, and school boards all have to consider this individually. And I think there's 73 entities in the state, including DeKalb, that have the freeze that Mr. Siegler was talking about. So there's really, for those, they're not really concerned, but they're concerned because a lot of the other ones, like they mentioned the school board in DeKalb is opting out, but they, would have a significant economic impact on them because they don't currently have a freeze in place. But the General Assembly has delivered the message that they are, looking for people or looking for local governments not to opt out. So they introduced this other bill called House Bill 92, and that deals with the ad valorem part of the law and is trying to encourage people who may have already opted out or are considering opting out to not opt out. And I would go into the details of it. One, it might confuse you more, and it also is changing. It changed this afternoon. It's going through the legislative process, and the language of the bill keeps changing. So it's hard to know what's in it from minute to minute as it keeps changing. But the general overall view of it is they're looking for ways to try to convince people local governments that are opting out to not opt out. But generally, both bills that I mentioned don't really impact the decision that the Board of Commissioners is going to make tomorrow. I just wanted to make everybody aware of what's going on at the legislature, which is constantly a changing process down there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to ask a question because I see everyone sitting here, and hopefully you've been able to follow what we've explained. We have talked about the cities, and of course, DeKalb County is comprised of 12 different cities: Chamblee, Dunwoody, Doraville, Tucker, Stone Mountain, Stonecrest, Lithonia, Pine Lake, Clarkston, City of Decatur, Tucker. Each has the authority to choose to opt in or out. Now, I want to say to everyone sitting here that the best part of what we're discussing is that our tax commissioner will apply the most beneficial assessment for you as it relates to your home. So at this time, I'm not quite sure how we do it, but I do want to take questions if there are any at this time. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak a little bit. Okay, so I am a physician, I'm a doctor, and I understand all what you say. But when you throw numbers to everybody at once and it's about our money, people are confused. So I didn't hear none of you explaining precisely what is the negative impact on homeowners. How many households have your DeKalb County, ma'am?
How many households?
870 what? Thousand.
In terms of, there's a difference between
To pay
households and the
money.
number of residents. DeKalb County currently has approximately 770,000 residents.
Yes, ma'am. I went to the water increase meeting, the hearing.
Yes.
And they are projecting to increase our water bill in the next 3 years, 10% every year, which will collect from the homeowners $4 billion. Mm-hmm. So in my, what I do for living, if we are bleeding and you take 2% more of my blood, if I am already bleeding, without giving me a transfusion, I'm going to... No, I haven't finished. Nobody has a question, so let me deliver, at least deliver.
No, well, wait. Let's be very respectful.
Yes,
because
I am
there
respectful.
may be other questions.
So, 4 negative impacts are: 1, potential property tax increase, unequal tax burden, because we are equal, but in money making we are not. Revenue volatility, the budget shortfalls, always your budgets are over budget for what we pay, and the potential iniquities of the loss of the funds the distribution based on your decisions every single year. We cannot change anything without not knowing our budget, where our money is going, where our water increase is going, and we don't have a relief, a transfusion, because not even 2% of my salary has been increased.
Understood.
Period. And I humbly ask you to please don't throw us in that fall of you will choose the best for you, because what is the best for you today is not going to be in December 26, 27, and forward. Because I have my job today, but I don't know if I have it tomorrow.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let me say to everyone that has assembled here today, has everyone here ever heard of the term unfunded mandate? I want to be clear that we're not here because this was a choice by DeKalb County. This took place under the Gold Dome by the General Assembly. And unfortunately, it has an effect on us all, because I want to be clear, I am a DeKalb County resident, and I don't have the luxury of saying to Governor Kemp nor the General Assembly that we plain and simply choose not to act. We are required to take an action. I want to be very clear that if we do absolutely nothing, we remain as we are until 2033, because that is when it would be time for a referendum for our e-host. So the exemptions that you have would remain in place until that time. If we opt in, nothing changes until 2023. Now at 2033, then if our referendum does not pass, things would change and we would be bound by HB581. But I just want to be clear with you that currently the biggest benefit that we see is remaining and keeping our homestead exemption that we currently have. But we are not here on our own accord. We are here because April of 2024, Governor Kemp signed into law this particular House bill, and now it's our responsibility to enforce it. Now, so I just have to be very clear there. Now, this question says, will PowerPoint be available on county website? Absolutely. It is already on the county website, and I am not sure, JP, make sure that there are registration forms outside, because if you're not receiving the county newsletter, if you do so, you've already received the presentation. It was sent last week. Question number 2, if county opts out of HB 581, can we come back at later date and opt in? I will defer, but in doing so, that is not an option, I do not believe. Is that correct, Mr. Baskerville?
That is correct. Under the current legislation, you cannot. That may change, but not at this point.
Now, the next question that I have here, I hope I can read this question. My divorce is new, but my house has been my home since 1979. How does that work for me? If your home, of course, since 2006, I believe, is when we started with homestead exemption. And as we expressed here, the freeze is based upon the year prior to your opt-in. That is when your tax liability was frozen. So depending upon the year that you opt in, you getting a divorce has nothing to do with how we're assessing you taxes. Whatever year you opted in, then your freeze remains. Your marital status has absolutely nothing at all to do with that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking at, and I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, that the taxes were based on the freeze, but on the freeze of the base of your property. But the way I understand it by looking at my bill, if I see my bill, my tax liability, my gross liability is based on my fair market value, 40% of my fair market value. Now, my freeze of my baseline reduces that liability.
Yeah.
And then I get a reduction based on what is called the construction home, which is $10,000 times the millage rate. Then we get a reduction based on the e-host, which is the sales tax, which is going away in 2029. So my question is, I just wanted to be sure, because that's the way I understood it, that is, my tax liability is based on my fair market minus all of these exemptions.
I will allow Mr. Siegler to answer that question, but I do want to say for everyone in here, you are correct. When you look at the property of your home, we assess 40%, and from there we begin to make the deductions. Go ahead, Mr. Siegler.
Thank you, Madam CEO. So you are basically correct. So if you look at the tax bill, which I don't know that we can get it back up there, but the first column that you'll see to the left will be your 40% assessment. And then that'll be multiplied by the millage rates, which that's basically just the term for the property tax rate. And then it will apply the exemptions. So I think the way it would work, like in the example that we use, the value of the base assessment freeze, I believe, was $38,000. So it'll take that $38,000 and say what that, the taxes would have been on that $38,000, and give you a credit or give you an exemption on your bill equal to what that amounts to. And then you have the constitutional homestead exemption, which is $10,000. That's the basic homestead exemption. And there are other homestead exemptions that may apply depending on your circumstances. And then the e-host credit is applied. So all those different columns, that's how the calculation takes place. And then at the end, you'll have your net tax liability.
Each one of those, the millage rate is applied to each one of them.
Correct.
Then my final question is, with the e-host going away in 2029, what is going to be put in place if we opt in, if we opt out to replace that credit of the e-host?
I'm sorry, repeat that again.
The e-host, according to what you said, the e-host is going away or will expire in 2029. That's a credit that we're receiving. So once that expires, is there something else that's going to go in its place to help reduce the taxes?
Let me be clear. 2033 is when our current e-host, the freeze, yes, expires. I'm going to allow Mr. Siegler to respond to that one, or actually our attorney.
The e-host and the SPLOST are credits through a sales tax that are currently scheduled to expire around 2029, 2030. The exemption, you are correct, would go for another 3 years to 2033. As written, House Bill 581 does not provide anything to take its place, but the General Assembly could fix the ceiling on the 2% cap for sales tax so that DeKalb could have a referendum for a SPLOST 3. If the SPLOST 3 is passed by the voters of DeKalb, assuming that the bill is fixed and the General Assembly allows us to have that vote through the fix, when it's passed, we would have a SPLOST 3 right behind SPLOST 2, the way we had SPLOST 2 right behind SPLOST 1, and our exemption would continue. E-host would continue with SPLOST, SPLOST would go forward because of the passage, and the exemption would go forward as well. The expiration of the exemption on your property tax will run out 3 years after we stop having e-host. So as long as we keep SPLOST going and we keep e-host with it, which we must do, then the clock for our exemption will not tick and it will just continue as well. So the credit from the exemption, the break from the exemption and the credit from SPLOST and e-host would all work together. E-host goes directly to your taxes, as you know, your property taxes. I hope that answers your question of how those work together, what the timing is. There is nothing in place now. That's the short answer to you. But with help from the General Assembly and passage of the appropriate referendums, then it could continue. Okay?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, all due respect, once again, thank you for everyone for coming out tonight. We have a system that we have the index cards, and we love for your question to be on the index cards. That'll allow us to answer most of the questions tonight, if not all of them. We're going to take this final question by microphone. Thank you kindly.
Okay.
And let me say that because of time, what we've done previously is when cards are given, if you will go to the website to our documents for HB581, the questions will be answered there. There is someone that sent up a card saying you mentioned 12 cities in the county. What about unincorporated DeKalb residents? I want to be clear. I'm saying to you that they are faced with the same decision that we are. Each and every city has the responsibility for making a decision. Also, if all three hearings, people voted to opt in, stay the same, why would the Board of Commissioners choose to opt out and not listen to the residents of DeKalb County? The vote takes place tomorrow, and I would think that our Board of Commissioners would listen to the residents of the county. What method would be used to determine the choice of exemption, an algorithm or third party? What this person is asking is, when we say that the most beneficial deduction will be applied, who chooses what's the most beneficial deduction? Let me say that it's math. Let's be clear, we didn't say we're doing this because we need more money. We are doing this because, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, if this third party or algorithm or the tax commissioner and the staff, the board, whoever's making the decision on your home, which one should you go with? Your home. Because they're not sitting hand by hand, one by one, looking and saying, oh, I think we're going to go with full from this one and the regular one on that one. You're going to use the algorithm. You're going to use the legal system. And we need clarity on who's going to set that up, who's going to program it, who's going to verify and check that, who's going to audit that, and who's going to audit you.
Understood.
That's all of us are one. That's why all of us are clear. We know that you're going to go in there tomorrow, make decisions on our behalf, and really don't care how you feel about it. You're going to make the choice. But we still are all trying to clarity. What are you going to do after? That's all.
Understood. And let me say to you that we have had discussion concerning increasing of staff because we understood. And I take nothing at all away from your statements. At this time, until the vote takes place, we will not be able to make firm decisions. I will not stand here and report to you what I do not know at this time. So continue, of course, this is what we call transparency. We brought this to you because this not only affects you, it affects me as well and my home. So as we move forward, once the vote takes place, then we will begin the process thereafter of determining how many individuals, whether there is, first time we've used the word, an algorithm, that will make the determination as to the amount and what is most beneficial. But I will say that at the end of the day, it always comes down to math, just as we showed there. So we will disclose the method and the mathematical equation that's used to determine based upon that particular homeowner. And I can say to you that currently our eHost is the best system, staying with what we have.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Peace and blessings, Hetepu. The question I have, and thank you, sister, for that. I do think there needs to be clarification of some system on the website, just like Social Security, where we can monitor and see how things were calculated. Okay. With that being said, you talked about inflation, but we didn't talk about deflation. Okay. Right now, 5,000 homes went on the market within a 14-day period in Washington, D.C. due to the government firing people. I'm sure that DeKalb County is going to be affected, especially with CDC, okay, and Veterans Administration. So with that being said, what is the formula for when the property prices decrease instead of inflation, deflation? Are we going to see a reduction in our taxes? That's what I want to know, especially in 2025. And secondly, could you please expand upon who controls the money for FLOSS? Thank you. Greatly appreciate it.
No problem. Let me say that if your property value should begin to decrease, then so would your tax liability. So that's just how it goes. Currently, over the past several years, we have seen property values in DeKalb County increase. And in all honesty, even with what we see happening on the federal level, and from day to day, as you turn on your television, the narrative may change. I don't believe that property values will begin to change in line with what we see happening on a federal level. Now, that's my assessment, but I could be completely wrong with that assessment.
We heard nothing.
And in the spirit of time, we do have additional questions. I will turn these over right now, honestly, carry them over to Mr. Zachary Williams. And the answer to many of these questions may already be on the website because this is our second town hall. But at this time, we must go into the budget hearing because it is also a mandatory presentation that we do this evening for the residents of DeKalb County to understand our budget. So if we can bring up those slides, we will get through them. And please visit the website. JP will make sure as you're leaving, if you want to register for the DeKalb County newsletter, please do so. And that way you will automatically receive a link to all of the questions. So at this point, we are going to walk through our budget for DeKalb County. And let me say that on January 2nd, I assumed office, and by January 15th, we presented a $1.8 billion balanced budget for DeKalb County, Georgia. And I want to publicly acknowledge Mr. TJ Sigler for his assistance, because prior to my arrival, he had received many of the budgetary requests from the various departments in DeKalb County. And I want to be clear that we have 58 funds that are associated with our budget. So, of course, what we have presented is a balanced budget for this year with few adjustments. And it represents a starting point for me because we are in the process of reimagining DeKalb. Most departmental budgets that you see that are presented within this budget, and the entire budget is available online, they remain flat. And also we have amendments that have come in for the budget, and we will begin introducing new initiatives. Now, in terms of my budget approach for this year, what I am seeking to do is allow service delivery to continue at the current level, but affording me and the administration the ability and opportunity to assess DeKalb County's operations as well as our finances. Now, to this end, what you see here is what I am proposing as a part of my first budget for DeKalb County. We will conduct a pay and classification study across DeKalb County for each and every job title we have. Some of you may have seen that last week. We have taken action now to make DeKalb County police officers amongst the highest paid in the state of Georgia. And I want to be clear, I do understand that pay increases alone will not solve our problems. I have to be clear there because I cannot legislate morality and decency. That starts at home. But in terms of the metro Atlanta area, for several years, we have seen recruits come and go. It has been a revolving door. We have over 850 funded positions and only 531 officers at this time. We're missing a third of our police force. And it's really important that we get officers on the street. So what I demonstrated last week was my commitment to those who protect and serve. And I want to say to you that within the next quarter, I expect these numbers to turn around. So tell everyone you know we now offer a $500 monthly housing allowance to our officers. We also have down payment assistance. We will pay your down payment up to $250,000. If you choose a home above $250,000, you are responsible for filling the gap. We also cover medical 100%. So we are going to get officers on the street, and we're going to get tough with protecting the people of DeKalb County, Georgia. Do not bring it to DeKalb, okay? Also, we are doing county operational assessments. And with the county operational assessments, we're looking at several different departments across DeKalb. And it's simply to assess where we are, to determine where we need to be. If we're good, we're going to build upon what's good. If there's room for improvement, then we're going to reimagine it. So certain departments, for instance, one that I'll give you because this is really important over my several years, code compliance. Code compliance is very important because, like with policing, crime scores affect your property values, your quality of life, and economic development. And in some parts of DeKalb County, our crime scores are so high along Glenwood, certain parts of Memorial Drive, Covington Highway, that we now have businesses who cannot receive premise liability insurance. Now, I am very clear. I understand where we are, and I understand what we need. And in order to get economic development, we've got to lower crime scores in DeKalb County because no one wants to come into an area that has high crime. So as we assess departments, code compliance and enforcement, I want to carry us from being responsive to being proactive. There should be no reason we pass 5 violations to get to the one for which we had a call, okay? So you're going to see some changes there. Planning and sustainability for some of you that may be business owners. Ensuring that it runs properly. Because when we have delays in planning and sustainability and we're not getting out business licenses and LDPs, land disturbance permits, every day that equates to money. And people will choose to do business where it's easy and not difficult. So we will assess planning and sustainability, and in some cases, we may choose to outsource and privatize. I will see what the numbers say and what the recommendations are for the agencies that we are bringing in to conduct our internal assessments. Beyond that, fines and fees analysis. You know, government is no different from your home. We receive the majority of our money through the tax digest, what we receive from your taxes for your home. Beyond that, of course, if we don't have it, we can't do it. So I've had a lot of departments that have begun to come in to me and make requests, and it has come to my attention that in some instances, we have not increased fees for certain services in 10 years or longer. However, the cost of doing business has increased. So I am now doing a fine and fees analysis, particularly in our courts. And to be honest, if you don't go, you won't know. Okay? But we are pulling the fees from all jurisdictions so that we can bring our fee structure in line with what other jurisdictions are paying. Because we've got to get aggressive on going to those who come to us. If you don't go, you won't know, but you're going to start paying more. The cost of justice in DeKalb County is going up, okay? Also, we're doing an updated cost allocation study, and that's really important because, of course, as I expressed, DeKalb County has a total of 12 different cities, and what I've found is that in some instances, since we signed IGAs, intergovernmental agreements to deliver services, we've not revisited the contract. And this has been well over a decade. And I want to be clear. I want, you know, when I say what I'm saying here, in terms of an updated cost allocation study, the cost of services increases for cities as well. And as a general rule, most cities choose 3 things are required when you become a city, 3 services: code compliance, zoning, and parks and recreation. That is the low-hanging fruit. Try delivering sanitation. Try delivering police services, okay? So we are going to do a cost allocation study to determine, as it relates to the services we're delivering for our cities, what those fees should be, and we're going to bring them in line. Because increasingly, and I want to say to DeKalb County, you guys, we're awake. People have begun to realize what we do not have and question why we are where we are. And I'm not upset at anyone for wanting more. Okay? So we're going to rise to the occasion, and we're going to ensure that we are charging for the service delivery to our cities the appropriate amounts. And the last thing, a facilities master plan. Sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards, and we have a lot of facilities, and you know I need to make sure that we're maintaining them properly before we continue acquisition. Because even sitting here, you know, there are things that that are needed by many of our facilities, including our senior centers. So once we create that facilities master plan, then we will create a service schedule for our facilities that we currently have. Now, I'm going to my next slide, and I'll try to rush through it a little bit more, but fund balance, what you see here, the projected fund balance that ended with 2024 was $43.6 million, and that's slightly less than 1 month of reserve for our budget. And I have already directed staff to develop a 4-year plan to have fund balance equivalent to 4 months of operating expense. That's too close for comfort when DeKalb County has a month in reserve. Other tax funds include $74.6 million, but I want to be clear, not all of that money is available for general fund use. You can't take designated funds and call it general fund. It's designated. So what you all have from me are the true and accurate numbers of what we currently have in-house. Going to the next slide, I think on this one, Mr. Siegler, I'll let you take it over now. I think they've heard enough from me. He likes graphs and bars, so.
All right, thank you again, Madam CEO. So what I want to point out here is this graph, we always started in 2010, because I don't know if you can tell, but in 2010, this is the starting fund balance for our tax funds, which is a major part of our budget. We were actually in the negative in 2010. And so we've moved our way up. You know, if you just follow that graph, you can see where it's gone. We're not where we want to be. As Madam CEO mentioned, the goal is to get to 4 months of fund balance. This budget will get us to about 1.7 months is the projection for the general fund, but we still have, you know, that still leaves us 2.3 months to go. Right, so these are just a few other items that are included in the proposed budget for 25. One is $2 million for a real-time crime technology center for the police. Madam CEO also mentioned the pay enhancements for police for recruiting and retention. Another is we're assuming within the budget an increase of 10% in the water and sewer rates. So that is still in front of the Board of Commissioners, and obviously whatever is adopted, we'll have to adjust our budget accordingly. Hospital fund, which that's a fund that's used to provide operating assistance and also pay for debt for Grady Memorial Healthcare System. That increases $6 million this year based on the operating agreement that was approved between the county and Grady. And then the sanitation fund increases this year, mostly due to some charges that were reinstated this year. So some of y'all might be aware that sanitation had a rate increase last year, and to help soften that blow for the ratepayer. All right. Something else that's a little bit different in this year's budget compared to previous years is our capital improvement program. So we're working through a process now to try to develop a 5-year capital improvement plan that's comprehensive. So it'll include everything within the county and look at all the different funding sources. So one of the items that you've heard, or terms that you've heard discussed tonight, is the SPLOST, which is Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. So it's a sales tax, just like all the others, except for its express purpose is for capital improvements. And so the SPLOST funding is not part of the annual budget. So the goal with the CIP committee is to have a complete recommendation, including SPLOST funds, including any other funds that aren't part of our operating budget, annual operating budget. So for that reason, what is recommended in the operating budget for 2025 is a smaller amount than what's normal in terms of capital improvement projects. So it's about $7.9 million currently for CIP projects. Okay, just a few other notes about our budget process this year. So Madam CEO mentioned that we were on a very compressed time schedule due to the fact that she was sworn in at the beginning of the year, and the recommendation was due to the Board of Commissioners January 15th. Another change this year is we implemented a new budgeting system. It's called OpenGov, And along with the budgeting system, it also has a lot of transparency features, which we are still building out. So bear with us. They'll be there, and you'll be able to go online and see a lot of the information about the budget and see where we spend our money. But we are using that system now, and we're learning it, and I think it's going to be a vast improvement over what we've done in the past. And then this just lays out the timeline for the rest of the budget process. I won't go line by line here. But where we are tonight is the budget is on the agenda for the Board of Commissioners tomorrow for their approval. So we'll have another public hearing tomorrow during the Board of Commissioners meeting at 10 o'clock. And that's when they'll adopt the budget. And one thing I'll point out to you is that by law, part of the DeKalb Organizational Act is the budget must be adopted by March 1st, but the budget can be amended at any point throughout the year. So that's what we're going to be working on for the rest of, at least through the spring and probably all year long, is going through these assessments, looking at these, how we're currently operating and what we could be doing better, and coming back with amendments to the budget to improve the services that we provide. Okay, this slide is just a pie chart showing where the funds go by fund within the tax funds. So the big green slice there, that's the general fund. So that funds all the countywide services. So it would include budgets for the sheriff, any of the court systems, the administrative offices, so the CEO's office, the Board of Commissioners, all those like countywide governance functions are within the general fund. The second largest slice there is for the police fund. That's there in blue. See, that's about 17%. So the police fund is not a countywide fund, though, because it depends on whether you're an unincorporated or a DeKalb or one of the cities. So some of the cities do participate in our police fund, but many cities have their own police departments. And then the next biggest slice is for the fire fund. That one is most of the county. The only two cities that aren't a part of the fire fund are the city of Decatur and the city of Atlanta, because they have their own fire departments. And then some of the other ones are a lot smaller. The only other one I'll point out here, well, we talked about the hospital fund and what that's for. And then that slice that's in orange, that's the designated services fund. You might say, well, what's that mean? So that's for your parks as well as for roads and drainage and transportation. So that term comes from some state legislation that's passed back in the 80s. So, all right, this table is probably pretty hard to read from where you are, but what I'll point out here is what we were talking about with the fund balance. So if you look in that last column with the months reserved, you'll see for total tax funds it's 1.7 months reserved. I might have misspoke earlier about the general fund. I think that's, I can't read it from here. I believe it's 1.6 months. There's 1.8? Oh. Okay, that's what I thought from here. So, but this just shows you, what we're starting the year with, what we think we'll be able to bring in revenue, what we're budgeting for expenses, and then what we think the reserves will be at the end of the year. Okay, this is the budget broken down in another way. So what we've been focusing on so far is the tax funds. So they're named that because most of the funding comes through your taxes, through property taxes, also some sales taxes. Then the next largest part of the budget is the enterprise fund. So enterprise funds include the water and sewer fund, sanitation fund, stormwater fund, any of those things that you pay a fee for the services you receive. And then I won't go through all the other ones, but total, the county's annual budget is about $1.8 billion. You'll see that the proposal for 2025 is actually a slight decrease over the 2024 budget. So it's about 1.25% lower than the 2024 budget. Okay, this graph just shows the tax digest. And so tax digest, if you're unfamiliar with that term, is just the value, total value of all taxable property within the county. So this would include, commercial real estate, residential real estate, as well as personal property, anything that's subject to property taxes. And so the green bars, well, excuse me, the blue bars, that's what we call the gross tax digest. So that's that 40% assessment that is used as sort of the starting point for the calculations. And then the green bars are the net tax digest. So that's taking everything that's in the gross tax digest and subtracting out all those exemptions that we talked about earlier. So the homestead exemptions, the property assessment freeze, and so forth. So really, when we're doing the budget and we're trying to calculate how much money we think we'll have through revenue, it's that green bar that matters, because that's what's calculating how much revenue we receive through property taxes. Okay, and then this is still showing the tax digest. It's just showing the change year over year. And over there on the far right is the projection for 2025. You'll see that it's pretty conservative. What it works out to is we used about 3% for the real estate market, and we didn't adjust the exemptions at all, so that's why the bars look a little bit different than the previous years. But for the other years on here, the average was annual growth of 9.4% in the gross tax digest and 7.9, I believe, in the 7.9 in the net tax digest. Okay, and final thing here is just a link to the budget website. This should be the same address that was in the previous presentation on HB581, but if you go there, we have information about this year's budget, as well as links to the interactive budget, and information going back probably 20 years at least on budgets. So if you ever need reading material to put you to sleep. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Madam CEO.
Well, when you get to the budget, you begin to lose your audience. Do I have some questions out there? Okay, thank you. But, this is really important, and it's, I'm not sure if any of you have ever attended a budget hearing, but I'm really glad you're here because I want you to understand what we're doing and how we do it, as well as our plans. Now, one thing that Mr. Siegler spoke about that I did not, but I'm very excited about, is our real-time crime technology center and the $2 million budgetary item there. Because I am convinced that as we move forward, that the future of crime prevention is deeply rooted in technology. Dunwoody, as well as several other local jurisdictions, have already implemented real-time crime technology centers, which allows us to dispatch even a drone to a site quicker in some instances than we can get there or our officers due to traffic. So in DeKalb, we're going to put eyes on you as quickly as possible because these are things that, truly do help deter crime. Now, are we still able to opt into the current exemption? We back on to that one. We haven't opted out at this point. Tomorrow, and I do want to be very clear, I do expect, I have served as a member of the governing authority, as a commissioner, and I always listen to you. And I do believe that our commissioners understand what is the proper course of action here. However, as the CEO, I do not have a vote. So tomorrow I expect that things should go as they should based upon the information that we have. Let's see. I have been in-house for 29 years. I lived on the same street for 31. The pile at the landfill has grown significantly. What plans are in place to address the growing landfill off River Road, which is an African-American community? I think I read this backwards because I see over on this side. Let me be clear, when it comes to the landfill, it is heavily regulated in terms of the sales and when those must be closed out. If there is a specific concern that you have, please, I'm very accessible. Send me an email so that we can have that conversation. Terry Phillips covered flossed in the presentation. He said the floating sales tax will be between 5%, 0.5%, and 1%. However, the slide had values that said 0.05 and 1%, which is correct?
It's
Yes, please.
the way the legislation is drafted, if I misspoke, forgive me, it's 0.05%, which is half a cent, or 1%, which is 1 penny. I can't hear you. If the tax is applied in DeKalb County, it would be all over the county. But again, it depends on if the cities and the county are in on that tax. No, those are two very different things. The exemption is the opt-in or opt-out on the property taxes. The credit is the sales tax, which is a different question, whether we opt in or opt out.
And the next question, because since we're here, we're going to talk about what you're asking. Will the ownership of so many homes in DeKalb by these various companies, and I take that to mean LLCs, Wall Street, and private investors, and not individuals, have a negative effect on revenue and affect this bill? Let me say to you, it will not. To be clear, most of you that are sitting here, because, you know, we've done this north, central, and south. And primarily, I would say most of you are central to south, meaning Memorial Drive back. And without a doubt, over 50% of properties sold that are residential R100 since 2020 in South and unincorporated DeKalb that are residential have not been sold to individuals, but LLCs, Wall Street, and private investors. And this is a situation that is unique to Central and South DeKalb. But in terms of House Bill 581, has no bearing on that. Biggest issue we have, you know, is that it affects code compliance, because 70% of the homes that we experience who have code violations are actually owned not by individuals, but by corporate entities. So we do have legislation, since we're talking about that. Every year we present under the Gold Dome my legislative priorities. So this year, one of my priorities was to repeal the law that currently prohibits a rental registry. And they're calling it a rental database now. And I don't care what they call it, it has the same effect. But with a rental database, what would be required is if you purchase a residential property and you are an LLC, Wall Street, or private investor, you must give constructive notice to DeKalb County. Now, once that happens, you would be required to always have a point of contact available to us, so that if there is an issue of code compliance, then we can easily get to you. Second thing that would happen with that, if you come into a residential community and you purchase a home, you're no longer a residential home. You are a commercial enterprise, and I want my tax money. Okay? And let me be clear, I would like to put that money in a fund to be used for seniors and individuals with sensitive incomes for updates to homes and necessities. So I am excited because thus far, you can never say what they will do, but thus far it has been very favorable. Because to be honest, often people that carry laws have no idea how it affects you. People will approach an individual and say, can you carry this bill? And they carry the bill, and it has an adverse effect on a different community and not theirs. So I want to urge all of you to pay attention. When humanly possible, go down to the Gold Dome and read what people do and hold them accountable. If they are not acting in your best interest, I'm just shocked at what I see some people do. Legislation that was carried for such things, individuals from the North who have no issue whatsoever with LLCs, Wall Street, and private investors are carrying legislation that affects us. let's be clear. Pad splits, let me explain first what it is, so educate as we go. A pad split is when an individual comes into a residential community, takes a residential home, probably puts a different key code or lock on each and every bedroom, and literally creates a mini hotel that may have 5 different bedrooms. Those are illegal in DeKalb County. So if you see activity that indicates to you that that is what's going on, please send us an email, give us a street address. You're free to remain anonymous. We will send out code compliance. We will take the necessary steps to determine whether or not it is operating as a pad split, and then we will send a notice to cease and desist. And if they fail to do so, then we're going to bound them over to the courts. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Well, I don't know what you mean holding up the courts. The courts are there to hear cases. Mm-hmm. That is, and let me be clear, no one should tell you not to exercise your right as a DeKalb County citizen. So we're going to take that off the table right now. My email address is lcjohnson, lcjohnson@DeKalb County GA. I really appreciate, and I see Miss Jocelyn sitting here, because I have a whole delegation in here of faces that I see and know. Miss Rochelle Callender, I know y'all by name, and you send me emails and we respond. So if you will send me, yes. So send me an email and include the property address. And as soon as you do, that's when we can start the process that's necessary. But no one should ever tell you not to report an issue. Now, getting things through the court system, that's something that takes a while. Mm-hmm.
What we've understood in Rainbow Estates is that as the issue is caught up in state court. Now, do you have any information along with that? And let me also add, we had a task that we've gone through code enforcement. They were cited. They extended it for almost a year before they finally went to court. They went to court, pled no contest.
Okay. I understand, and I want to say to each and every one of you in here, when you see me do something, it was with good reason. When I make these decisions, stand with me, because I live in the same community that you do, and I have seen over the years things go through a cycle for too long, and it sends the wrong message to community that you don't care. So what we're doing, for instance, you know, many of you may know up here on Wesley Chapel, there's this home behind the McDonald's that closed down, and it took almost 2.5, 3 years to get it through court and get the yard cleaned. And then I drove by, and to my shock, it was like round 2. And I literally picked up the phone and said to Miss Director Hardy, go clean it up. Put a lien on the house, because this sends the wrong message in the community. So we have to begin adjusting. And, you know, we have to hold, you know, citizens, and I do not want to be difficult with anyone, because I can say that we have cut the grass for people that have suffered from heart disease. Tell us if you have a problem so we can help you solve it. But it's not okay to keep your home in a state of disrepair. Okay? But please, everyone in here has my email address. Send those emails, lcjohnson@DeKalbCountyGA.gov, and we'll address the issue. Well, when it comes to Airbnbs, let me say to you that because we've dealt with it in my community where I live, one of the inherent rights of ownership is the right of dispossession, the right of transfer. You can allow someone to come into your home, but that individual has to abide by the same rules and regulations as you would as a homeowner. Because it is being utilized as an Airbnb, that doesn't make it illegal. But I should know. So if there's something that goes on at this home in terms of parties, because we've experienced it too, then you need to call police officers and they need to come out, because there is a homeowner somewhere that needs to be cited for that activity that's taking place. So I cannot stand here and say that it's illegal to rent a home as an Airbnb, but if you are renting it, you are bound by the same requirements for quiet enjoyment that every other citizen in that community is, okay? So feel free to reach out. And to be honest, we are out of time. And I see JP still coming up here. Yes, ma'am. You mean from the school tax? Well, let me say to you that I'm approaching, but it's not the county's decision. This is set by the school board. And I would also believe, Attorney Phillips, if I'm correct, General Assembly is who makes that determination. So to be honest, not to sound like an attorney, but I cannot answer you with any degree of certainty as to what their decisions will be, because the county has no control over the school board and their taxes. But this is something that I've heard many times over the years, because at some point people just feel I'm taxed out, you know, because your children, you know, have grown up, they've left home, you're in your 60s. At what point do you get a break? And so I understand what you're saying, but unfortunately, I have no control over the school taxes. And as we said, for those of you who see a change in your tax digest, if you have e-host, if you have filed homestead exemption, then I want to be clear, you might want to look at your school taxes. Doesn't have anything to do with DeKalb County. And yes, ma'am. And after this, I'm going to let you all go home because we are over time. And COO Williams, I didn't see you come to the podium, so we're going to send you all the questions tonight.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are you still accepting the homestead exempt for age 62, 65, and 70?
Oh, yeah, anyone can apply. Yes, anyone can apply and seek homestead exemption. And let me say to all of you, if this is any indication, it warms my heart to have seen so many of you, including my aunt who's moseying out of here, come out tonight, because this is really important, and this is what we have to do as community, because there are so many issues that we're dealing with. And don't let people say that we don't care about our communities, because we do. So thank you all. Feel free to email me. If you're not getting our newsletter, JP, you should be out there making sure you get those email addresses so we can stay in touch with you. And I'll be here if there's anyone who wants to speak to me on the side. You're welcome. Love y'all, DeKalb.